Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on another sunny day here in the capital as once again we bring together a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership. My name is Scott Challoner and we're going to be joined a little later on in the programme by former Education Secretary and incumbent Leaders Council Chairman Lord Blunkett. But for now, I'm delighted to have Dawn Redhead alongside me, the CEO of the Lawnmowers Independent Theatre Company, an organisation which offers services and training in the arts to people with learning disabilities, and it also fights for social justice. Dawn, very warm welcome to you, and thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me.
It's our pleasure, Dawn, for sure. The reason we're here, of course, is to discuss your take on leadership. But before we dive into that side of the discussion, considering that today's leaders are probably going through one of the greatest challenges of our time in the shape of COVID-19, I feel it would be remiss of me not to ask you just how much that pandemic has affected you and your operations.
Oh, 100%. We obviously work with highly vulnerable, high-risk people. And so we're also very lucky to have a medical doctor on our board. So during January right through to March, we kept a firm eye on current affairs, medical facts, etc. with the pandemic or the emerging pandemic. We started to make some changes based on our advanced thinking about what was going to happen to the organisation in or around February. And then obviously huge, massive, lots of work went into creating new hygiene policies and new way of working at the arts centre that we are based in Gateshead Town Weir, right from probably mid-February. It's quite difficult because we had to really project what we thought was going to happen based on what we were seeing, because it's very difficult just to ask somebody with a learning difficulty and quite a lot of staff. We've got 25 staff and some of them only work part-time. So we realised that we would have to start operating really stringent and rigorous hygiene policies in advance so that when it came to it, we weren't really thinking about lockdown at that point. But when it came to it, it was actually in people's minds. They were operating it already. So we're always really quite ahead of, or we think we were, what actually happened. And it was the same with lockdown. We decided to lock down on the 14th of March based on conversations with carers and key workers, social services, staff board, and our own knowledge of what was happening. And of course, it followed on about a week and a half that the whole country locked down. So we immediately went into, we've got a whole set of people here, at least 100 that we work with. They're going to go into lockdown and need major crisis support. They're going to lose, it's very important that people keep their routine and also their time with friends as well as their training. So we very, very quickly went through the risk assessments and all the permissions we needed from funders in order to adapt our programs to a whole remote digital learning with a whole set of commitment policies and registration facilities. And it was quite stringent. We completed the risk assessment. The program managers completed the digital platforms that were needed in order to operate. And then the members took a week off where we put those things in place. And we started operating literally on the day of lockdown, a whole remote digital program with progression routes and in line with our business plan and our targets as much as it possibly could be, given the fact that we didn't have physical activity going on. So it was a really, really big piece of work done a little bit in advance. So we were quite lucky as everything hit in the fan. And we started that, like I say, the day of lockdown. And it was a bit foreign for people at first. But we knew we work with a lot of creative session leaders and program managers and who are very physical in terms of, in the arts, music, dance, it was all very foreign for them too. So I had quite a guided program of what we expected from them in terms of being able to deliver online activities in the art. But we knew that once they got into that, and once the things started to settle down, that creative brain between everyone would start to really develop those programs digitally and artistically, and also would want to do more. And that has happened. We've run a really, really successful remote learning program, complete with masses of support and crisis support for our membership right from the get-go. So we're really very lucky. We couldn't have done it without funders and funder support, but we've been very, very lucky. All of our workers, our self-employed workers and artists, all remained employed, and we've had to really redevelop safeguards, homework and risk assessments, all sorts, but we've done it very quickly, and it's only because we've got such a great team and everybody had such a desire. It was such a shock to people, the lockdown. And so, and in particular, ourselves lost all of their income without any notice. This was the only income strand that they had. So there was fire and passion to make it happen. And with all of that fire, passion and knowledge and skills, we were able to create this wonderful program that's running really successfully even as we speak now. We're doing work for the universities, for online resources. We've created films, celebrated Pride Inside. We've created films for carers and isolators, ran programs every single day for our membership, the same programs that they would have at the centre, but digitally, and then reported on those. So yeah, it's been a busy time, very emotional and very exhausting for everybody, but it's been a real massive and I suppose privileged. We've been privileged and very lucky to be able to offer that.
And it's an example of really taking the lead on mental health and well-being as well, because what the programme has done by the sounds of it is also reduce that sort of feeling of social isolation for the membership, who are, of course, vulnerable people. And it's really sort of brought it sort of right into the home for them. And that's absolutely integral, isn't it? Because mental health well-being are two important issues that have really been thrust back into the limelight by this situation.
Absolutely. I think that before I became CEO, I was head of operations for the organisation. And quite often, we've got a very, very busy programme. So quite often in the past, I've been with the organisation going into 20 years now. I've spent periods of time when we've had really big funding bids, etc., working from home myself, because it just gets so busy and so active. We're such an active organisation. It's hard to find the quiet space you need to be able to do that kind of complex work. So right from the get-go, I really did know how isolating and soul-destroying being at home without any strategy in place to motivate yourself can get. So it was part of the original risk assessment that we put in, a commitment strategy, a registration policy. We'll continue to ring our membership if they didn't engage. Where are you? You've got your session. And that, because at the beginning, it was all pandemonium, obviously, in the country. And they've had that routine and that commitment right from the start, because you knew that if this went on 3 months, 2 months, 4 months, that by month 4, without that kind of organisational, what's the word I'm looking for, engagement strategy, if it was just almost an optional thing that people could fall off the loop and that they could get very, very isolated at home. So certainly, and even despite this, we've dealt with quite a lot of emotional issues and mental health issues, and the program's been a lifeline for not just our members but also our staff.
That's incredibly encouraging to hear, and I can imagine that you've learnt an awful lot about those people around you as well and the way that they've applied themselves during this period, because it seems that it rings true that people do bring the best out of themselves in a time of adversity such as this.
Yeah, I I get quite emotional all the time about how wonderful people have been in making sure that this works, how the organisation runs on skills, of course, but also on passion as well. It's very difficult for any charity to keep going in any climate, but the last few years have been quite difficult in terms of keeping going. But it's been that extra mile that the staff and the members always work to in order to just keep going. And I think they have that passion applied to this programme. We've met with, we're a very resilient organisation, and we've had to adapt in the past as well. So, but this was by far one of the biggest challenges that we faced, and it was faced with the same absolute desire. So, but we're very lucky that way. If it had have, you're only as strong as your weakest link, really. But the strength in the team has been absolutely amazing and quite emotional and overwhelming to experience, and it has brought everybody together. Yeah.
And in a leadership role such as yours, Dawn, where is it that you draw your inspiration from? Because as sort of a leader in your role, I suppose the people around you would look to you to find that inspiration in that direction. But where is it that you tend to look for it as and when you need it?
Well, I've been with the organisation a long time now, and my mentor was our original founding artistic director, Geraldine Ling. So I learned a lot from her, but I've really learned a lot from our members. We are a company run by and for people with learning difficulties, which essentially means that our membership is at the forefront of all of our strategy and operational decision making. And it's quite a challenge at times when our membership went from 2001, we had 5 members, we've now got over 100. So it's quite a challenge to keep that in place, but it's an absolute imperatively important part of our organisation. And it's about handing power back to people who have been disempowered and making sure that you don't inadvertently, even for the right intentions, disempower people in what you try to provide. So that has been something that I've been operating for the last 19, going on 20 years. And it is where I draw my inspiration from. I don't really appreciate dictator style leadership, or I really think that we need to have the overarching structure and strategy, but that everybody's involved in where we want to go and where we want to be and where and how we organise and operate the organisation. So yeah, from the members themselves.
And of course, you've been with the organisation for some time, as you say. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 2001 that you first joined the Lawnmowers, Dawn.
Yeah.
Based upon all of the experience that you have under your belt now, if you could perhaps go back to 2001 when you first joined, is there anything that you would do differently going forward?
Well, I don't think so, because when I first joined, they literally just formed from a community group into a limited company and charity. So they'd only started to operate as a limited company and charity in the January, and I started in August. So it was very, very fresh and very, very new organisation, and I had no money in the bank at all. And so we've actually grown and developed as an organisation together over the years, piece by piece. Our funders in particular, and including Arts Council and Lottery, was being funded by Esme Fairbairn Foundation, have supported the organisation to develop its structure, whilst we continue to operate in a collective fashion. So I don't think I would change anything, quite frankly. We've developed so beautifully over the years, and we're in a great place now in terms of what we offer and how many people will reach out in the community when we can go back.
And thinking about going back and really reaching out again in the future over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, we know that it's going to be difficult because we're still adjusting to the new normal way of living and working under these new procedures. So what does the Lawnmowers really hope to achieve during that period, and what is next for you?
Well, I think that the first thing that we'll do is we've got the next quarter earmarked as a staggered transition back to the Arts Centre for our membership and our staff. So at the moment, we're deep in risk assessment. We'll continue to run digital and physical programmes along with our risk assessment. And the upshot is that our work goes out into the community to try and help change attitudes and achieve social justice for people with learning difficulties, including our members. So we will continue to adapt our program to be able to offer that digitally until it's safe for people to go back out into the community. And in the meantime, we'll transition our membership back and actually work with them, including ourselves, train ourselves too, to the new normal. They're actually really great when it comes to, the one-way system we've had to implement into the centre that's about to start being operated, etc. But going forward, the plan is to get back out into the community and work with all our networks, colleagues, friends, and interested parties. So we'll do that when it's safe to do so. In the meantime, we've got great audiences even now digitally. At first, we kept it. The programs are closed and private from a safeguarding point of view, but pretty soon within those programs, we wanted to start performing again for audiences, reaching sort of strategic networks so that we could talk about how and where we're going to go back into the community, etc. So there's been a whole program. We've got an digital online festival running at the moment. That's been an open call nationally. We've got films going on and what have you. So we'll reorganise digitally in the first instance, and then we'll start to stagger back into the community when it's safe to do so. But the plan is to get back out there.
And let's certainly hope that plan does really come to fruition. And over the next few months, I actually think it would be wonderful, Dawn, to catch up and have you back on the programme with us at some point, just to see how things are getting on and just see how those hopes are being borne out, for sure. I
would very much appreciate that.
It would be wonderful for sure, because I've really enjoyed having you on the programme today. It's been a real pleasure having you speak with us about, of course, your take on the last few months, your views on leadership, and most importantly, Dawn, until we do speak again in future, please do continue to take care and stay safe with all still going on, and that goes for everybody associated with the Lawnmowers as well.
Thank you very much, and you.
I was speaking today to Dawn Redhead, CEO of the Lawnmowers Independent Theatre Company, and I would reiterate that message to all of those listening today. Do continue to look after yourselves and others, because it does make a real difference in saving lives. Coming up next on today's programme, I'll be handing over to Matthew O'Neill for his exclusive interview with former Education Secretary and incumbent Leaders' Council Chairman, Lord David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett made a name for himself during his political career as a prominent Labour MP and Secretary of State, holding numerous key positions in the cabinet of Tony Blair, and serving as the MP for his Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough constituency for 28 years. And he enjoyed all of that as a career despite being blind from birth. He was elevated to the House of Lords in August 2015. I hope you all enjoy listening just as much as Matthew relished the opportunity to speak with Lord Blunkett, and all of that is, of course, coming up next.
Lord Blunkett, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with you.
Well, of course, nothing is being said at the moment other than COVID-19, which we must touch on. What would your message be to small businesses who are trying to keep going?
Well, I think the last ones standing will be the ones that thrive when we get back to some sort of normality. So it's have confidence and courage. Obviously, take advantage as far as you can of the government help. I think that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has gone about as far as you could have expected in the circumstances. There are obviously small businesses that fall between the cracks. Those who don't have defined premises can't benefit from the business rate waiver, have not really been able to demonstrate that they can adhere to the PAYE for furloughing staff, and of course whether they can receive the grant, 10,000 or 25,000. All of those who can are obviously able at least to benefit from that for the time being and look to the future. But I think the second thing to say, and they don't need me to tell them this as a politician who did once do a business studies qualification, which is that it will be a different world, and being able to think about how that world will look in a year's time and be creative about it and learn from not just what's happening to you at this moment in time, but to others around you and the sector that you're working in, that will be really important.
Do you feel that the long-term effects of the COVID-19 outbreak will in some ways be positive for British industry?
Well, only in the sense that people are having to be creative, they're having to adjust and innovate. Therefore, they're thinking about more productive, if you like, greater productivity ways of delivering the same service or delivering the same products. And in that sense, I think we'll have temporarily at least very much higher unemployment than we've become used to, but we'll probably have a burst of productivity, which will help with the recovery. Whether it will help with the inequity of the way in which our economy is imbalanced, both between services and productivity and the production of goods and services, I'm not sure. What we will need to try and do is to ensure that the geographic imbalance that exists is, as far as humanly possible, is dealt with by both the entrepreneurship and innovation from the bottom up and targeted government help, which will still be needed. And we are now in the throes of the kind of borrowing that we saw back in 2008 to save the banking and economic system. We're having to do that to save the whole of our productive business and commerce. And I think that will have to be sustained for some time.
Do you feel that people will take a second look at global supply chains in the wake of this outbreak?
I think there's going to be much more creative ways of using local supply and linking up inside sectors much more effectively. And I hope that the Leaders' Council will be able to play a part in that, in the sense that people who have something in common, a synergy in terms of what they're delivering, whether it's a service or whether it's manufacturing or whatever, will be able to see that there's a good outcome from knowing the sector better, linking with people, not just geographically, locally, but those in this country who may not have been on the radar in terms of what they produced for the supply chain. And of course, ensuring, because there's quite a lot of fraud going on as we speak with people getting into cyber attacks, that they'll also take account of going into the cyber security side effectively as well. The more we are online, the more people who are working from home, the more vulnerable those businesses and their supply chain become. And that's something to think about as well.
How important is strong leadership at the moment?
Well, I actually think that it's brought to the fore leadership in a whole range of areas, from obviously government itself, and there's been ups and downs with the Prime Minister's severe illness, but all the way through the public and private sector, people have, to use the jargon, stepped up, and they've shown local, regional, national level the kind of leadership that Britain historically was very good at. Regrettably, we've not seen the same on the international scene for all kinds of reasons, but maybe we will in future. So I think out of this will come experience of people who have seen an opportunity to do good, as well as seen an opportunity to provide a good service or goods, including, for instance, shortages for the health and social care system, the food chain and the like, but also I think in terms of seeing the synergy between the private and the voluntary sector and using people's commitment to each other in a very positive way. I'm not sentimental about this. Things will revert. But actually, I think there's a kind of moment of moral judgment of people feeling that they've got a role to play outside the immediate survival that they're engaged in. And if we can hang on to a little bit of that social responsibility, that will be a very positive outcome.
Absolutely. Now, what's your broad view of how the government is responding to this? Are you broadly supportive of their measures?
Well, it may surprise people to hear that I have been very supportive. Of course, there's been legitimate criticisms about the speed of response on protective equipment and on issues relating to testing. But my own view is very similar to the challenge that was made to the Prime Minister of Italy when people said, why didn't you close Italy down faster? And he said, a fortnight before we did it, I would have been considered to be a madman and nobody would have agreed to do it if I'd tried to move too quickly. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on here in the UK. We may have seen the signals elsewhere across the world and taken them more seriously at the time. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but as someone who's had his life in the opposite political party to the present government, I think that with some hiccups and mistakes, they've not done a bad job in what has been incredibly difficult circumstances.
And you're absolutely right. In a liberal democracy that we live in, it's very difficult for people to swallow orders given to them from government.
Well, the UK and the US, and to some extent the Scandinavian countries, have a very different history and therefore interest in maintaining the freedom to decide and the persuasion and consent that's required. Those countries that have experienced one way or another totalitarianism over the last century have a slightly different way of coming at this. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think that that's why getting the balance right of getting people to go along with what you want them to do in their interests as well as the nation as a whole is a sensible, proportional balance. And I think we now need to adjust to the coming out of the crisis gradually, readjusting to recovery in the same way.
Now, something you've mentioned recently on this balance is the police overreach in the enforcement of the COVID-19 structures that have been put in place. What have they done right, and where have they gone too far?
Well, I think that they were interpreting what was not necessarily as clear advice as it might have been for all kinds of reasons, because people were feeling their way. I think what's come out of it has been a demonstration by local police services in some parts of the country that they could get people to do what was needed without the heavy hand of drones overhead or people being told that they shouldn't be walking in the street, because this was all about self-isolation, not incarceration. It was about getting people not to pass the infection on to each other and therefore to provide distance rather than to make our lives a misery. Those police services that adopted that policing by consent and chivying people along did really well. Those who went over the top, I think, soon got a very substantial pushback. And one of the strengths of our democracy is that you could have that debate. People could say, I'm terribly sorry, we think the police force in our area has gone over the top. And that in itself is a constraint and a readjustment. That's another strength of living in a country where you can have opinions and express them without actually being thought to be a fool.
Now, of course, the government has faced criticism that they were slow to react, and Boris Johnson wasn't present at the early COVID-19 COBRA meetings. Now, Number 10 has claimed that this is normal practice. The health secretary often chairs COBRA meetings related to health. Does this tally with your experience as a Secretary of State, or would you have expected the PM to be more hands-on during the initial stages?
I think different prime ministers do have a very different style. And Boris's style, which I think will now be considerably adjusted, was very swashbuckling. In some senses, delegating is a good thing, as every leader of every business or public service knows. Those who try to pull too much into themselves end up with a massive bottleneck, great failure of trust, and the inability of people to show what they're worth and to demonstrate their capability. So I'd be very wary of jumping in and saying he was wrong to delegate the essential COBRA meetings. What I was surprised about was that he didn't chair the first couple, because my experience with Tony Blair for the 8 years I was in cabinet was that Tony was a great delegator, but he would get a grip to begin with, watch what the difficulties were, and then give people direction and confidence to be able to get on with it. So looking back, I think Boris himself probably thinks, God, I wish I'd spotted the signals from elsewhere in the world more rapidly, and I'd just been there. However, this also raises another issue. All of us in positions of leadership need good teams around us.
Mm-hmm.
I think after this is over, he will be assessing those who really did step up and those who demonstrated their inadequacy. I think we'll probably end up in a year's time with a much stronger cabinet than we have today.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we've seen a significant drop in the visibility of certain special advisors like Dominic Cummings during this entire period. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out.
Well, it's certainly readjusted the role of those behind the scenes with those who should be taking the decisions, having received advice. Obviously, there's been a complete transformation in the profile of experts, if I might use that term, who'd previously been denigrated.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists, medics, people with behavioral science understanding. My only criticism was, were we getting wide enough advice? Were we narrowing it too much to a couple of key centres in London? But that's because I've always been adverse to everything being London-centric. I think there's great expertise, wisdom, experience out in the sticks, and we should use it.
Rightly so. Now, was pandemic planning part of your time as a minister, particularly perhaps when you were Home Secretary?
Well, it was, but it was on the back of risk arising out of counter-terrorism measures.
Right.
I was the Home Secretary for 3 months when the attack took place in September 2001 on the World Trade Center and beyond. We did an enormous amount of scenario planning, both desktop and real. On the back of that, it was very heavily orientated to future developing terrorism risk. I certainly got involved with talking about pandemics. I remember being at a seminar in Edinburgh where the university there had done a lot of work itself on the issue of pandemics. And of course, we saw SARS and other things emerging. I think people have criticised the government for not picking up the report from 2015, 5 years ago. I think that what happens is human nature kicks in. You deal with what you're immediately faced with. You can sponsor reports, and this is true of business planning, of course, as well, and scenario planning for what business continuity will look like, recovery plans for business, what will happen if there's a cyber attack, what happens if there's an energy shutdown. These kind of things you can look at, but you're immediately turning your eyes to what's in front of you. And had we picked up a bit more on the danger from Ebola and SARS and what have you in the past, then we might have said, what if something hits us in the developed nations that we don't have a vaccine for, that we can't immediately whisk up protective materials or equipment, or for that matter, medicines that help with recovery, all of which we now see are a danger. I think this will make an enormous difference to the planning for the years ahead. I hope it will be widened so that we don't just look at what's happened, but very rarely do you see something exactly repeat itself. Some of the circumstances will be, but others won't. So that's why I've put emphasis in what I talk about on looking at the other virus, the cyber attack scenario, which could be just as dangerous in a world of just-in-time provision. One of the miracles of the modern developed world, except for the very poor, has been the distribution of food. A lot of it on computerized, technologically advanced systems. If that were to come down, we'd be in real trouble. So I think we need to think those sort of scenarios as well.
So have a full plan across both sectors, biological warfare, pandemics, and cyber warfare.
Yes, and to do so on different levels. I think, again, thinking global but acting local, we need a lot more to think about what would happen if something took shape that actually broke down those national and global chains and how we would cope. And without, obviously, we've got enough fear and anxiety to last a lifetime without creating even more anxiety, we can think about those things for the future in a more rational way, I think.
Now, aside from the physical threat of the virus, one of the things that people are vastly worried about is the effect on the economy, not just the national economy, but also the world economy. Now, it has been said by certain parties, and I'd like to garner your thoughts on this. Is there a danger of the effects of the lockdown being even worse than those of the virus?
Were it be prolonged, I fear that balance would tip the other way. It is about proportionality. It is about balance. It's the wisdom of Solomon, really, to get the moment right when you start to move and then to move quickly. There's no doubt whatsoever that we are stocking up, not just on the economic and employment front, which will be devastating enough, but on the health and social well-being front, enormous challenges, and they will need careful handling because there's a lot of people whose lives, for a variety of reasons, are at risk in the future on a scale that we've been dealing with over the immediate handling of the pandemic, concentrating really hard on those affected by COVID-19, those sadly who have died or been seriously incapacitated. That will roll over into the economic, the social, the mental health and cultural well-being of the nation, and that will need all of us to pull together as well.
Absolutely. Now, do you believe the government's doing enough for business?
I think that the speed of reaction once the scale of the pandemic was clear was very good. I've praised Rishi Sunak for his action. Remember, a chancellor who only just come into office was planning to deliver the budget in the middle of March and has had at least three equivalent budgets since. I think he's handled it very well. Understandably worried now about what we're doing to our economy. The level of borrowing is sustainable because of low interest rates, but it reaches a point, of course, where it tips over so that you can't then do the kind of structural investment requirements that the government were laying out before and in the March budget. And those will have their consequences as well as a planned payback over many years. I think we've learned something over the last few months. We needed to take immediate action. We don't want another round of austerity equivalent from 2010 through to 2019. I don't think the nation, on the back of what's happened and the challenges we have, could take that. And therefore, we need a different plan, economic plan, over a much longer period, just as we did from the Second World War all the way through to 2002, when the final American loans were paid off.
Now, of course, one thing that's on everyone's lips, how much longer do you believe that the lockdown can go on for?
I believe that we need to be substantially back in action as an economy in June. This obviously is led in terms of places where people would meet in large numbers, having to adjust to the fact that it will be longer for them. And sadly, that will involve business closures. It's why the Chancellor extended the furlough scheme to the end of June. Mm-hmm. But unless we get things moving in June, I think we'll run into the summer where all kinds of services and industries will have a chain reaction effect. And what happens with one will then have a major impact on another. And then you get the skittle effect where things get knocked down that you hadn't perceived were going to be affected. So I very much, if I were in government, and I always think of things in that context, what would I do if I were in government? I would be on the side from the second week in May, on the side of the hawks in terms of saying we've got to start moving, and we've got to do so with the collaboration and cooperation of the public who have got the message, who did behave, who responded magnificently. Let's try and get back, perhaps doing things differently for a time, but substantially getting back to business as usual. And unless we do that, then those areas that can't and wouldn't expect to be back in action immediately get pushed further into the middle of the year and the autumn, and then they become unsustainable.
Now, of course, one of the other major developments we've had recently are the changes in the Labour Party. So if we could just speak on the Labour Party for a while. This might sound like an obvious question, but how does Sir Keir differ from Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I'm biased because I believe the Labour Party has come out of 4.5 years of a black hole of a nightmare, where it neither represented a credible opposition nor an electable government, and the combination was to let those who supported the Labour Party and needed some of its policies let them down very badly. Sir Keir Starmer both is a highly intelligent, professional lawyer who, as Director of Public Prosecutions, led the service well, had to take difficult decisions at a time of austerity, understands the world beyond Labour members, but has been able to do business with those who originally supported Jeremy Corbyn and was able to command support from them. His creation of a balanced shadow ministerial team has been very encouraging. I supported Lisa Nandy, who he's made Shadow Foreign Secretary, because I thought she understood the north of England and the disaffected former Labour voters. But I believe that Sir Keir has taken on board those who have something really sensible to offer, and I believe he will be both a great leader of the opposition. More importantly, he will then present himself as a credible alternative Prime Minister. And all governments need an alternative government at their shoulder. It was true of us from 97, and it took the Conservatives some time to recover and to get to that position, but they did, and the Labour Party will, and that's crucial for our democracy. All of us need to understand and appreciate that a living, breathing, functioning democracy requires a credible, confident, and in many ways supportable opposition, as well as a government that we clearly want to do well, because none of us want, as we didn't with the COVID crisis, none of us want the government to fail. We want to see our economy recover. We want our social well-being to be taken into account. We want to overcome deep-seated inequality and poverty, and we want to do it with enterprise and entrepreneurship and business playing their role. And that is about leadership nationally, locally, in the private and the public sector, people with ideas, with confidence, with the ability to pull teams around them, above all, to have some idea of what it is they want to achieve and a very good idea as to how to achieve it.
Now, of course, one of the biggest problems Sir Keir is facing will be tackling the party's anti-Semitism problem. There has been a recent internal report that has been quite damning. What's your response to that report, and what does Sir Keir need to do in response?
Well, there are two reports. One which is being produced by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which he will, and has already indicated, will implement in full. The second was a leaked report put together by the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, 800 pages of private interchanges on social media, which he has, Keir Starmer, set up an investigation to identify who did it, who leaked it, what the content was, does it have any salience and lessons for us, and where necessary, action will be taken. So I hope that as he moved very quickly to reassure the Jewish community, so he will be able to take the necessary steps to back up that reassurance with the kind of actions that says that this was a blight on a historic great political party that all of us were ashamed of. We've been able to put that behind us and to move on to facing the future with confidence.
What's the one key thing that Secure needs to do to restore Labour as an election-winning party?
I think Sir Keir Starmer's major challenge is to convince sceptical voters that Labour has not only reverted to a party that they can support because they can see it acting, developing, presenting as a credible alternative government, but also that the lessons have been learned from the fiasco from 2015 onwards. In other words, there have to be very clear signals of substantial change, not just the right words, not just reassurance that we're not going back to some of the crazier policies, but actually that we've understood why the electorate rejected those policies so substantially in December 2019. If people get that message, they'll understand that the Labour Party has changed, as it did in the 1980s and early 90s, to become the electable government with the greatest majority in historic majority, even greater than 1945, which I was privileged to be able to take advantage of in 1997 when I joined the cabinet.
Now, I know what your answer is going to be to this question, but indulge me. Do you think Sir Keir has what it takes to be PM?
Yes, I do. I think he has the background, he has the experience, he has the professionalism, he has the forensic mindset, and he has the confidence to have put a team around him which will ensure that it will work. And those elements are true of all leaders. Ideas, the ability to build a team, to have confidence in that team, and to be able to demonstrate leadership in practice, sometimes at the most difficult times. And, you know, the Leaders' Council, those sharing their thoughts with the kind of thing that we're doing now with a podcast, but also joining us in linking up in that network of people who can support and help each other and learn from each other. That is what needs to be done in politics as it needs to be done in business. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew.
Well, thank you for coming on the program. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all those listening in what has been a nightmare scenario. Good luck for the future. Have courage, have confidence, and yes, listen to those who know more about business than I ever will.
Thank you, Lord Plunkett.
Thank you.
This has been the Leaders' Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders' Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.